A dispute between neighbors is the latest scandal to rock the nation's highest court. And let's go back to late 2020 when, despite the fact that Donald Trump had just lost the presidential election, the soon-to-be ex-president and his supporters were in the midst of trying to overturn Joe Biden's victory. Across the country, of course, you may remember political tensions were running very high, including a normally quiet suburban cul-de-sac in Fairfax County, Virginia. Well, after attending a protest, a woman's adult daughter returned home to that suburb and propped up several political signs against bushes in the front yard. Now, it's not known exactly what was written on those signs, but according to a neighbor, one had Trump's name on it with an expletive, and the other carried a message along the lines of, quote, "You are complicit." What is known, however, is that the signs caused a heated exchange between the woman's daughter and another neighbor. In an act of retaliation, that neighbor responded to the young woman's political statement by making one of her own, displaying an upside-down American flag on her property. The inverted flag had become a symbol of the Stop the Steal movement used by Trump supporters who denied the legitimacy of Joe Biden's victory. But there was just one problem with this overtly political statement from that resident in Virginia. She was the wife of Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito. According to the New York Times, the photo of that flag outside Alito's residence was taken on January 17, 2021, just weeks after the insurrection at the U.S. Capitol and days before Joe Biden was inaugurated as president. It was also the same time period that the Supreme Court was weighing whether to take up a case brought by Trump allies challenging Pennsylvania's mail-in voting system, a case that would have had direct implications on the outcome of the 2020 election. At the time, Alito was in favor of reviewing the case, but the majority actually decided against it. And the report also raises fresh concerns over Alito's impartiality as the court is currently considering two important January 6-related cases, including whether or not the former president, Donald Trump, has absolute immunity for his efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Judicial experts told The Times that the flag was a clear violation of ethics rules, which seek to avoid even the appearance of bias and could sow doubt about Justice Alito's possible bias in cases related to the election and the Capitol riot. For his part, though, this is how Samuel Alito responded. He told the New York Times, quote, "I had no involvement whatsoever in the flying of the flag. It was briefly placed by Mrs. Alito in response to a neighbor's use of objectionable and personally insulting language on yard signs." Now, of course, you probably noticed missing from that statement is any sort of denial that the flag was flown in solidarity with the insurrectionists or any attempts by a sitting U.S. Supreme Court justice to somehow disavow the insurrectionists' lie that the 2020 election was stolen. But this story is about much more than an inverted flag, because we are still living in the shadow of the 2020 election and the violent insurrection that followed. While this reporting is coming to light now, and while we're still waiting to see if Donald Trump will ever be held accountable for what he did, the threat the ex-president and his acolytes pose to our democracy is hardly in the past. From the Supreme Court to the Senate, Trump and his allies are plainly laying the groundwork for another January 6th right in front of our eyes. In fact, just this morning, Florida Senator Marco Rubio refused to commit to accept the results of the next election. Watch.
Will you accept the election results of 2024 no matter what happens, Senator?
No matter what happens? No, if it's an unfair election, I think it's going to be contested by either side.
But this effort, again, goes far beyond sowing seeds of doubt in our election system. Trump's allies are working to reshape our democracy, taking inspiration from autocrats like Hungary's Viktor Orban. Again, here's Senator J.D. Vance praising Orban just earlier today.
But Viktor Orban in particular, as you know, I mean, he rewrote the Constitution. He neutered the courts. He has tried to control the media. These are not necessarily conservative principles. So why would you want to mimic him?
Well, look, I'm not endorsing every single thing that Viktor Orban has ever done. I don't know everything he's ever done. What I do think is on the university principle, the idea that taxpayers should have some influence in how their money is spent at these universities, it's a totally reasonable thing. And I do think that he's made some smart decisions there that we could learn from the United States.
Well, it's not just senators auditioning to be potentially Trump vice presidential picks. It's Trump himself. Just last night, he took another page out of the authoritarian handbook. floating the possibility of a three-term presidency, something that is barred under our U.S. Constitution.
You know, FDR, 16 years, almost 16 years. He was four-term. I don't know. Are we going to be considered three-term or two-term?
It was 3 years ago that rioters stormed the Capitol and attempted to assault our democracy on January the 6th. And now, with less than 6 months to the election, fascism is at the gates. And Donald Trump and his acolytes are ready to finish the job. Just a short time ago, I had the chance to speak with Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland about the crisis at our nation's highest court and more. Congressman Raskin, thank you so much for joining us. Let's start with this reporting from the New York Times. I'm just curious to get your response to it, to Justice Alito's comments that he had no involvement and that it was his wife's choice to hang that inverted flag. Is that a good enough excuse for a sitting Supreme Court justice?
Well, look, if we had a binding ethics code on the Supreme Court, somebody would be able to complain about it, and then there would be a real investigation rather than just dueling press releases and press statements. I would think that for a sitting justice of the United States Supreme Court, somebody in your neighborhood putting up an anti-Trump sign doesn't really justify a Supreme Court justice inverting the flag of the United States and sending out a symbol of distress. But again, the real issue is that we don't have a system for dealing with that kind of problem. But in the political symbolism of America now, it makes sense to me. I mean, Donald Trump turned the Bible upside down. Justice Alito turned the flag upside down. MAGA has been trying to turn the Constitution and the rule of law upside down. So we're in a struggle for just the basic integrity of our political system.
You bring up a very important point about the ethics rules, which is a big problem now, as we've seen with this Supreme Court. And because it's not subject to any binding ethics rule, you have introduced legislation to fix that problem, the Judicial Ethics Enforcement Act. Realistically speaking, is there a path forward for that bill with this modern-day Republican Party?
No, not in this Congress. They're not interested in it. And of course, they don't think there's any problem with the Supreme Court, which has overthrown women's right to choose an abortion, which has been trying to undercut the effectiveness of our administrative agencies like the EPA, and has been in a full-blown assault on the voting rights of the people. So they like what this reactionary court has been doing. So they're not going to hear it. But right now we have a situation where the highest court in the land has the lowest ethical standards. It's literally the only court in the land, in the federal judiciary or in the state system, which does not have a binding ethics code in a way to complain if justice completely violates the basic principles of judging.
And in the absence of any kind of meaningful reform or accountability, the question now is what should happen? You've got Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Dick Durbin, calling on Alito to recuse himself. But you also have respected constitutional law professor at Harvard, Lawrence Tribe, saying that's simply not enough. He says talk is cheap. Chairman Dick Durbin needs to do more than call on Alito to recuse himself from the insurrection cases. Durbin needs to step up and use the subpoena power to demand Alito's appearance and explanation before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Do you, sir, agree with Lawrence Tribe? Should Alito be subpoenaed to appear before Congress?
Well, all of this is an attempt to compensate for the utter inadequacy of the current system because there is no binding ethics code or nowhere you can go to complain. So certainly demands for recusal make absolute sense across the board by citizens, by members of the House and the Senate. And if the Senate can render subpoenas to have the justice come and testify about his alleged neutrality and objectivity, that would be great. But, you know, I don't hold out a lot of hope for any of those things happening. The problem with the subpoena power on the Senate side, of course, is that in order to enforce such a subpoena, you need 60 votes. The Democrats have only 51 votes. So I don't know whether or not they'll want to go down that road. But the public at least needs to be understanding what's taking place here. There's an absolute collapse of the legitimacy of the Supreme Court. You've got billionaire sugar daddies who are paying for justices' private school tuitions and their cars and mortgages and just crazy stuff going on. And then you have a complete inversion of basic constitutional concepts and an abandonment of the Supreme Court role when it comes to something like Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, whose meaning could not be plainer. If you've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution and you violate it by engaging in insurrection, you can never hold federal or state office again. But the Supreme Court has done everything that it can to just obliterate the meaning of that passage.
Let me also, if I can, pivot and get your thoughts on something that was also said today that was extremely troubling. And I just want to get your reaction to it as a member of Congress. These are comments from Senator Marco Rubio earlier today, the senator refusing to say whether he would accept the results of the 2024 presidential election and instead blame Democrats for sowing doubts about the election. What do you make of what Senator Rubio did today?
Well, he's demonstrating his complete submission and subserviency to Donald Trump. I mean, that is now the litmus test within the GOP. Will you accept Donald Trump's approach to elections, which is he does not accept the outcome of any elections that don't go his way? And, in some sense, it's redundant to be asking about whether they'll accept the results of the 2024 election. They still don't accept the results of the 2020 election. They are still out there spreading doubt and skepticism about whether Joe Biden won, despite the fact that we have 60 federal and state court rulings and judgments rejecting every claim of electoral fraud and corruption that Republicans and Donald Trump raised then and continue to talk about now. There's just no proof or evidence for what they're saying. And at this point, it's just a pure conspiracy theory, but it is the glue of the Republican Party, which is what makes them far more like a religious cult today than a modern political party that's based on facts and evidence and critical thinking.
Congressman, before I go, I did want to ask you about a new investigation that you're spearheading into Trump's request for $1 billion in campaign cash in exchange, or I should say 4 major oil companies in exchange for favorable policies to these oil companies following an event that was held in Mar-a-Lago last month. As the minority party, I know that your investigative powers are limited at the moment in Congress, but what action are you taking to learn more about that meeting and this possible exchange?
Well, we've written to the oil and gas executives to ask about what they know about their participation or their company's participation in this meeting, where Donald Trump said, essentially, you guys give me $1 billion and I'm going to issue a series of regulations reversing Biden administration progress on climate change. And so he made very specific statements about liquefied natural gas and about oil drilling. And, this is, at this point, it's not really a conflict of interest. It's a convergence of interest where you see Donald Trump and his team and the Project 2025 people coming forward to say, we're going to reverse all of the progress that's been made on climate change by giving the big oil and gas companies everything they want. And Donald Trump saying, and I want in return $1 billion from you guys, so the whole country can see what's happening. Again, with the current demobilized state of the Federal Election Commission, I don't have a lot of high hopes we'll be able to make anything happen, but at least the people need to know what's taking place.
All right, Congressman Jamie Raskin, always a pleasure, sir. Thank you so much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.